L. Feaster, Jr., born in December the 23rd, 1929. I was 82 years old a year ago, almost, so half a year ago. And born in Perry, Florida. I'm a native Floridian. And I presently live in Micanopy, Florida. Lived there for the past 76 years. In this general vicinity. I grew up there, and then I built a home within a half mile of where I grew up. I had 3 brothers and a sister, and my brother, who was joined the Air Force, was in the Air Force when I was in Korea, and he was in his flight training. He had gotten his commission and was doing advanced training in Langley, Virginia, and went down in a plane accident.
Your brother?
Yes. So he went down in a plane accident in the Atlantic, and that's what met me when I got off the ship in Washington. I got a telegram saying that they were holding his services until I got home, April of '53. And I got over there as I was in the 92nd, assigned to the 92nd Armored Field Artillery Battalion. That was my major, and ROTC was artillery. In ROTC, between your junior and senior year, they send you for 2 weeks of training at an Army post. So I went to North Carolina. What's the artillery school in North Carolina? And we had artillery training there. So
you must be good at this artillery training, because that involves a lot of mathematical formulas and
well,
stuff, right?
and later on I used it as a forward observer, and I was on the Hill, they call it, for about a month or two, and then later they assigned me to the Fire Direction Center, where I used my mathematics for directing the Fire Direction Center, which controlled the 18 weapons in the battalion.
What were people talking about the Korean War back in your college days?
It's hard to think back that far. Very difficult. It didn't. To me, it just seemed like a part of life that was my obligation. I didn't see it. Didn't. I don't know. Our families didn't make a big deal out of it. They just thought that was part of what I was obligated to do, to be a part of the activities over there. And I'm not sure that the full extent of what was going on was assimilated. We're in a little country group. It just didn't get a lot of discussion.
Have you know anything about Korea before you leave?
No, never heard about it.
There were no Koreans in Florida at the time?
Not that I know of.
Not that you know.
I went to a country school, and the nearest town was Gainesville, Florida, which was a university town, and as far as I know, we didn't have a lot of foreigners, as we call them, coming into the university, and none in the school where I went to school.
So how did you get to Korea?
I went to Travis. I went by train to Travis Air Force Base in California, and flew to Hawaii, and I think we also landed at Okinawa, and went then to Japan at Camp Drake. And then went by bus to Sasebo. Took 2 weeks of CBR training, chemical, biological, and radiological training. 2 weeks of that, and then ferried over to Korea and trained to Seoul, just outside of Seoul, and picked up my unit truck that took me to the 38th, where our unit was in defensive position. Had been for about a year, I think. They were still negotiating the peace, so we weren't moving a lot. We were still getting fires, and we were firing back, but we didn't move any, and we were prepared.
How severe the battle was, the trench war?
Well, at that time, it was kind of low, except we had spurts, I believe. There was a session with Outpost Harry during that time. And I recall that when I was fire direction assistant operations officer, we fired artillery all night long, 3,500 rounds. We fired what they call protective fires over the infantry. We had variable time fuse, or proximity they call it. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
There's radar control. When it got within, the projectile got within 50, I think about 50 feet or yards of the ground, it would go off. And so our infantry was dug in, but attacking troops were in the open. So we could fire right over our troops and catch the enemy on the ground, even when they were close to our troops. And so there were some real fights at that time. And then the week of the ceasefire, our battalion was ordered to move over near to Kumsong, and along with a lot of other artillery, because there was a lot of fighting going on there. And we moved over that night. It was a temporary move, so to speak. I don't know whether it was 10, 15, 20 miles, but we pulled in, set up in firing position, and before we settled down for the night, the battalion commander said, "Hey, Jake, you need to go back to our old position and pick up a load of supplies that we couldn't bring or didn't or forgot to bring, whatever." So I went back to the old position and loaded up and was ready to come back the next morning. I got a phone call saying, "Don't go back to your old position. They got run over last night. Chinese had broken through the South Korean lines and attacked their artillery, even was behind the infantry." And it turned out that our battalion was able to get out. They lost 2 or 3 guns they couldn't start. They were on, the tanks. They apparently had trouble when they went in. They kind of pulled them in, had engine trouble. They hadn't been dug in a long time back at the other position, and they weren't really serviced correctly or had that much running, so they couldn't go out with them. But we lost probably about a dozen people in the pullout, either POWs or killed or wounded in action. And all of this is indicated in our battalion website that's on the internet, description of our battles and that particular incident. So I missed that kind of hand-to-hand action that night because I was not there. But they were able to pull back and set up in another position and start returning fire. In fact, they fired back on our old position, our new position where we had left weapons to keep the Chinese from being able to use them, or repair them or pull them out. Later on, I was a battalion troop and information officer, which they call it TINE, and I was assigned the job of training, running a school, since that was my background. We had a battalion of about 700, and of those, over 100 of them didn't have an 8th grade education. We were over half. We were integrated then. We were, for a long time, the services had separate black units and white units. And so we were integrated, and most of those that didn't have the 8th grade were black. But I was assigned the job of having teachers to bring them up to an 8th grade level with their schooling. Later on, I was given a teaching assignment, participating in a NCO school, training the sergeants in advanced areas of our requirements of our unit. And then later I was assigned executive officer of the Charlie Battery. And then when the battery commander rotated, I became battery commander of Charlie Battery for the last 2 or 3 months, and then rotated home in July of '54. Promoted to captain, and instead of 2.5 years later getting out of the service, or at least getting inactive, stayed active the whole time, and they kept promoting me, and so that's how I ended up with full colonel after 27 years of active reserve duty. I did a 3-year tour of, assignment of liaison officer for West Point, for the academies. So I recruited in the high schools around my area for getting seniors to apply to get an appointment to either West Point or Air Force or Naval Academy.
Wow.
And so I had and then I was instructor with the USAR school, which I had going in with the reserve training to teach people that had just gotten their officer training to advance their training.
Let's go back to the armistice, July 27th of 1953. You were there at the moment.
Yeah.
What was it like to be there?
I don't
What
know.
did you
It you know, since we weren't on the front line, it didn't. It was just sort of a process, and I don't know. I guess after this many years, even though you felt a lot then, again, it just seemed like it was just a part of how life goes. And you know, they said quit firing, so we quit. and it was sort of sporadic, back and forth, and of course the negotiations were going on, and we followed those real close, and wondered when they were going to decide to agree on what they wanted, what each side was going to do, and they couldn't do it. But finally, they decided to quit. We'll stay where we are for the time being and see what happens, and so we're still there, looking to see who's going to do what.
Right. Oh, it's been 60 years since the armistice was signed.
That's a long
Can
time.
you think of any war that lasted 60 years? after
No,
the ceasefire in the 20th
no.
century?
I can't. I got the American History Award in high school, and I don't remember studying about anything that lasted this long.
There are still a lot of problems in North Korea, but if there is a petition to replace the armistice with a peace treaty, would you be willing to sign that?
I think so, as long as you know, they allow, similar to what East and West Germany, they finally tore down the wall, and so we can tear down the 38th parallel barbed wire and
That's too far ahead. I
Yeah.
mean, if there is a petition to replace the armistice with a peace treaty, would you be willing to consider to sign it?
I'm not sure what all the legal ramifications are, but I don't see I don't know what the agreements are going to be for that. You know, what each side will agree to whenever they sign it. I don't see you know, anyone taking over anyone else's territory as such. But if we can stay where we are and peacefully integrate back, I know there are a lot of families, South Koreans that have families in North Korea that they need to get back with, and I think they've repatriated all the prisoners involved in both sides, so that would be not a part of it. That was, what operation was that called? Big Switch? Or what was when they when they quit the firing, and then later on, I did a revisit to Korea in 2002, and went over to the what they call it, where they
Panmunjom,
Panmunjom, and also where the prisoners,
point of the bridge of point of no return.
yeah, and they had a, what was it, a alley or a tunnel or a bridge where they came across back and forth. So my son is a Korean War veteran.
Your son?
Yeah, he went to Korea in the 80s and spent a year there. So you know, at that time we're still recruiting the Korean service veterans. So he's a member. And we have not a lot, but we don't differentiate when we recruit. If you have served in Korea, you're eligible to join our chapter. So
Going back to the point, you belong to two chapters, and you know you can work with them. And
well, I'm actually the sort of the membership chairman for the Department of Florida. We have 22 chapters, and I monitor all of their activities, and then I also monitor the activities of the 233 chapters throughout the United States. So I've got all that data that I'm able to access that Jim Doppelhammer maintains on the website, and giving direction as I did the other day, trying to get the people to use the website to make their job easier and to make mine easier too.
What do you think is the legacy of Korean War and Korean War veterans?
Well, we've got a good start through our Telamerica program to pass it on to the other generations. And in fact, here a couple of years ago, we got an offer from someone, I don't know who it was, I think it might have been the Korean government, that came through our organization and sponsored some of us Korean War veterans to go back to Korea. I mean, not to Korea, I'm sorry, getting ahead of myself. Go to the academies. So it wasn't in Korea, but anyway, through our national government. And I took my son and myself both went to the Air Force Academy, and I lectured to the cadets on a Telamerica type program, and I had some of my Korea slides that I showed a PowerPoint presentation to them. So that's, and then we do it at the University of Florida still with my unit chapter that we have there. We do a lot of visit the high schools and talk to the classes, the history and the senior classes. And we have about a half a dozen of our chapter volunteer to sit down and have a round table discussion to the students and tell them about our experiences in Korea and get them interested in it.